I'm so glad that you're here. I mentioned when I saw you, was it last week? It was just last week. Was it just, God, I can't even, it was a week ago, wasn't it? I think it's been a week. I feel like I've slept a couple of times.
It's been about 10 days.
Yeah, okay. So I'm so glad that you guys came. I mentioned that Mr. Bialac was coming and he was going to give a tour for you. And this is Mr. James Bialac. His collection is, as described in the text, over 4,000 objects installed all over the campus. We're really looking forward to you guys having this opportunity because that's squealing. Do you want to come and just do something? And what we'd like to do is give you the opportunity. I know not all of you were able to make the collector's lecture that Janice Scaramucci did with the Disney exhibit, but really that's what inspired me that you guys needed this opportunity, because after I got to listen to the collector talk about the work, that's not scholarship, that's just like this personal relationship that I can't translate for you in labels or whatever. And so, it's still squealing. It's either that or it's your hearing aid. And so, when we started talking about Mr. Bialac being here for this week, it was primary in our discussions as if he was willing and able, and if you guys would be interested, and I think that it's a good fit. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Mr. Jim Bialac, and he likes to, is it okay if I introduce you as Jim?
Please.
Jim.
Well, actually, the collection that we're going to see today is just one of the collections that I've had. Another collection that I have built was shown here recently, Chinese teapots from the Yixing area. I collected those when I was in China. I've been to China about 5 or 6 times because I represented a lot of Chinese in Phoenix and was a member of the Edward Snow Foundation, who was the first journalist into China when Mao was in power out of Kansas City, and went on several trips with them as well. So that's just part, and of course when I was a kid I collected matchback covers like everybody else and wrote letters to mayors all over the country to please send me one, and I don't think I had anybody ever not send me one. And then a little later on I started collecting autographs because I was living in LA at the time near the Hollywood baseball team's field, which is called the Hollywood Stars. It was a AAA before they got Major League there. And they had great ball players there like Andy Pafko and so forth. And at one time, I was very fortunate. I was there when Babe Ruth happened to be visiting and was able to get his autograph. And then eventually, I had quite a bit of autographs, but being a kid, instead of using cents, I had people sign on both sides of the paper in the autograph book instead of one on each side, so that sort of ruined everything. But then eventually, about 6, 7 years ago, when I was on the board of the Naval League in Phoenix, I sent the autograph book over to San Diego to be auctioned off, and it was sold for $1,000, which I gave to the Navy League at that time. So that worked fine. And then basically a little background in this type of art. I've been a life trustee at the Herd Museum now for about 6 years, and I was a regular trustee for close to 40 years. And when they made me a life trustee, they gave me a gift for my service over the years. They had one of the major Kachina carvers and his son do a Kachina for me, which is over here. And that's how basically I looked when I just had a mustache. Yeah. It's called a koshari. It's a Hopi clown.
That's resembling
The stripes, incidentally, which I just found out recently, one of the reasons why this particular type of clown, and they have quite a few different kinds of clowns, and the Pueblos as well as the Navajos and the Kiowas and everybody else have their own clowns. The stripes are basically because of the stripes on the watermelon. And that's why you see them with watermelon a lot, and you see them eating watermelon, you see paintings of them with watermelon, And at the dances and between the dances, they hand out watermelons or cut them and give them to people or throw them at people or whatever. And they just act like clowns. What you're going to see, one of the paintings here is called Clowns Between the Dances. It's done by Otis Polonoma, who was one of the early painters on Hopi. And Otis painted right after the turn of the century, and he was well known for his painting of sad faces on his thing, in his art. And I mentioned that to him one time and said, please do me one with a lot of happy people and a lot of happy faces. And he did, and it's in the other room and we'll see it. He called it Clowns Between the Dances. Because when you have a Hopi Kachina dance on a reservation, you have quite a few people, and sometimes there can be 35 or 40, and sometimes just a few, depending on which pueblo it is, and what the season is, and what the particular dance is for. And they can't have the dancers all the time. There's one dance, the Supai dance, which is unbelievable. It has to, all the Kachinas in that, or the majority of them are young men, because in their dance step, instead of just a regular dance step, they're going like that for about 20 minutes without stopping. So you know that they have to be young to be able to take care of that. And every individual Indian nation has its own upbringing, its own taboos, its own everything. A lot of them borrow from each other. For instance, on Hopi, you've got 3 mesas. And first mesa, you have a bunch of people that came over during the 1500 revolution, came over from New Mexico, and they were Kiwa rather than Hopi, and they blended in, and the Hopis took them in. And Polaca, which is a village down below, up above and so forth, they call them Hopi Tiwas rather than Hopi. And there are quite a few painters and artists and things. The Hopis were very famous for their jewelry, for their painting, for their kachinas, and for, that is in the fine art manner. And every particular nation, so to speak, has its own things that most of the artists follow the same traditions. But then again, in the early start of the Indian art movement, Dorothy Dunn taught a class in Santa Fe called from the Indian School, the Santa Fe Indian School there. And I have quite a few examples of the people from that work down here at this time. Most of the work you will see is more of the traditional art instead of the later contemporary art, but they're still quite both, they both fit in. Over here is the first painting that I ever purchased. That's a painting by Robert G. And it's a game that the Moonwolves play. It's called the moccasin game. And they throw these sticks into the moccasins, which are buried in the ground, but just the top up. And as you can see, he even put the moccasins hanging from the top to make you understand the painting more as to what it is. So now if you'd like, we will go forward. And over here, this is a painting by Tony Abea. This was in a show that he had at the Herd Museum, which I purchased from the show. Tony is very modern, and yet he does a lot of things that are very traditional as well. He also makes jewelry. And he will be here this weekend. And he will do some demonstrations as well. And this is one of his pieces, and rather than me explain it, when you get time, if you wish, read here, and it'll explain. That's a wonderful thing that the curators have done here is they try to put some type of an explanation or reason for this particular painting or whatever it is was completed and help you understand what basically you're looking at. This was done by his father. This was done by Narciso Abeda. he was also known as Hasso Day. And if you look close at this painting when you get near it, you'll see that he painted it on sandpaper, regular sandpaper that you use in building a house. So at times they would use whatever was available. Now this has been repeated several times. You'll find that the Indian artists are not afraid to repeat. If something becomes popular and, oh, I want one of those, or I really love that, how come you didn't let me see it first, so forth and so on, they will repeat. Gilbert Aloysius from San Alfonso did that too. You'll see one of his paintings here. And you can probably see it at other places too, because he has done several of them. And this painting here, I purchased from John and Clara Lee Tanner. Clara Lee Tanner wrote the book on Southwest Indian art, and she used about 24 paintings from my collection, 24 or 34, I've forgotten which, in my collection, in her book. And when they did, and her husband was a dealer as Desert Arts Crafts in Tucson. He had that, and sold paintings and other Indian art things there. And they thought that this would be a nice thing for me to add my collection, so they called me up and said, if you want it, you can have it. And which, of course, I preferred. And then, let's see, right here behind you is a painting by R.C. Gorman. Gorman was more famous for his lithographs than just about anything that he ever did. This is a painting that my mother loved and wouldn't let me hang it any other place except in her house when she was alive. And as a matter of fact, one of his dealers, an older lady from Capistrano in California, when she would come to Phoenix, she would call me up and borrow this painting to put it in her apartment where she was staying while she was here, because she felt also that this was the best thing he ever did. And you got to look closer. It's just such a, it's Japanese art pastel, which is a greasy type in the floor and so forth that they're walking across, and just the two ladies with the parasol walking through, and he called it the parasol in the crowd. And eventually it became so popular because it was reproduced in quite a few different publications and stuff, that he tried to make a lithograph of it, but it just didn't work. It didn't work. He could not get back what he had in there. Now Gorman, for instance, lived in San Francisco on Army Street for a number of years back in the 60s, as did Patrick Spazo Hines, which is right over here, the Three Maidens. And I would go over and visit them, and one time I even got a letter from Gorman saying, hey Jim, come on back, I'm starving and I need you to buy some more paintings. So, what I point that out is to show you that collectors can become personal and close with the artists themselves and become good friends, and even though they're from different worlds and they have different interests and everything, they still can work together and understand each other and where they're coming from. And then as we walk down a little, you've got two paintings over here, one which is featured on almost every piece of literature that you see by Helen Hardman. And this one is an early one of Helen's here, of the three people here. And there's a little story to Helen's. Helen Hardman was the daughter of Pablito Velarde, a very famous artist from Santa Clara, Mexico, the Santa Clara Reservation. And Pablito used to spend every year selling her paintings over in Gallup, New Mexico, at the Gallup Ceremonial. And on my way into Santa Fe every summer, or most of the summers, I would always stop there and I'd spend time with her. Helen was about this big at the time. And I became close friends with both of them over the years and everything else. And then later, after she was a grown woman and everything, I would date her. When she'd come to Phoenix, she'd call me up and said, where are we going tonight, and so forth. So one night she called me and said, let's go to the Scottsdale National Art Show tonight. She was in town for that, and she said, would you like to go with me? And I said, sure. And as we were getting out of the car, she said, the best painting I've ever done is in there right now. She says, go ahead and run in and I'll just meet you. So I got out, and went to the door, got in as quick as I could, and then started running down the aisle. And at that time, they had people helping that would write down the receipt and give it to you, and then put a mark on the thing. And one of my friends was doing the marking and stuff. He saw me running. He said, "Aha, I know what you want." And wrote it up, and he says, "It's yours." So it's called the Winter Awakening, the Okwano. She won 6 major awards, not second prizes or honorable mentions, but 6 actual major awards, including Best Show at that show for this one painting. It was the most during the whole history of that show of any artist to receive recognition on that particular piece. And then you got some wonderful pieces in this area here. Over here is a smaller one. You'll see a larger one. This is called Chippewas preparing cleaning of the wild rice, I should say. And this is done by Patrick Desjardins. And Patrick, what he would do, he'd draw on the board the outline of the painting that he wanted to do. Then he'd put the board over here and have a projector project it onto the board here, and then he would fill it in so there wouldn't be any pencil marks or anything. And if you look close at his, you'll see that everything is a little dot. Just like the French artists used to do. Pontifical, I believe they called it. But you can see it in this and also in the other one, which is larger, which is quite fascinating. Then this is Patrick Swasson Hines, who I mentioned before. And the funny part of it is, this young lady here is Helen Harton. This one, right here. You can tell by the little pout in her mouth.
You can tell.
Well, people that know her should. And then we'll go on some more. This was done by a lady from Oklahoma, Belgian
Hesse.
Huh?
Belgian Hesse.
Yeah, Belgian Hesse. And she lived at one time out of Tulsa. I visited her there. And she had a wonderful control over watercolors, as you can see. She called this Sun Died Along the Way. She did quite a few of the Forest March paintings and things like that. And this is done by Fred Beaver, who is a Greek, but because he did so many Seminole paintings, a lot of people thought he was Seminole, and he was written up many times as a Seminole, when actually he was a full-blooded Greek. And you can see the detail that he gets in his things and how he builds his clouds. You can tell that the difference in the artist and the Pueblo, or the nation that he comes from, by the manner in which he displays his art. And then this is probably one of the finest paintings in the collection here. This is a woody crumble. This is a watercolor. One tiny mistake, one slip of the brush, and the painting is absolutely destroyed. As you can see, look at the colors, the way he has done it. Look at all of these little white dots through here and everything else. It's just absolutely amazing. Now, I found that painting up in Taos, Pueblo, with Tony Reyna, who at one time was the governor up there, and he and Crumble were friends, and Tony had a shop up there. So at times, Crumble would leave things with him to sell. Crumble was more famous for his prints, really, than his paintings, even though his paintings were fabulous. And that takes care about that. Now we're going to cut over here into this area here. And the first painting on the side there is called Many Faces of the Moon. It was by Tony Day from San Ildefonso, who was world famous mainly for his pottery as well as his paintings. And instead of me telling you about this painting, I'm going to let our gracious curator give you an explanation.
When we were talking about this painting, you can understand he and I have been spending time in the galleries to talk about the art. And I mentioned to him that this painting has really fascinated me. Over the last 3 years, I've been doing this research into indigenous astronomy, which a lot of people, when they think of our cultures, they just think of the arts and the songs and the music, but our native cultures have very well-developed intellectual areas in relationship to science and even literatures and things beyond what are commonly really promoted. the knowledge that tribes had about the stars is just fascinating. Every tribe had their own cosmology, and the constellations often are the records of those cosmologies. And I've actually applied for a grant. We'll see if I get it. If not, I might do the research anyway. But I'm really fascinated how Tony Day is using these very specific constellations. These are not just random marks. Every one of these I recognize as being a constellation visible from New Mexico. If you look, there might be some here that are even kind of similar to things that we see here in Oklahoma, but even that slight shift on the planet gives us a different view of the stars. It's very specific to that location. And so one of the things is a lot of people recognize that tribes used the sun as an organizing force of means. I mean, we all do, right? Because we measure our day by daytime versus nighttime, and these are very obvious ways. But tribes also very much use the stars and the moon as a means of organizing their annual calendar. And when ceremonies happen, often is more triggered by where the moon is and where a constellation is than it is necessarily by any solar movement. And so this is something that's like, just to me it's very fascinating. And for instance, we can see here, like, I think that this is probably, well, I'm not gonna pretend like I've done this research yet, but I do want to say that these are constellations. For instance, this constellation right here is a constellation that the Navajo also use very specifically. And so I haven't done the research into what San Ildefonso Pueblo calls it, but in the Navajo community, this is first woman, that shifting, and I think it's called the Cassiopeia in Greek astronomy. And so just to explore that and to understand too that he's created this very sort of modern geometric organization with these two figures. Do you see there's a head here and a head here? But those are actually rainbows. I think I've talked about that in other tours, so some of you this may seem familiar, but they're rainbow figures, deities of sorts, and rainbows are used to mark specific place. They're a way of sort of, on the pottery, when you see those arcing rainbows of like two bands, sometimes red and white, it's a way of sort of identifying a particular geographic place. It's not a random thing. And of course it shifts. I mean, if any of you have, okay, I've actually tried to catch a rainbow. It's a very long and fun afternoon, and they don't stay where they should stay. But the thing is, though, is that they do kind of, they're sort of ephemeral and in a way kind of magical. So you can imagine why they would get sort of endowed with this sense of, marking a place and being sort of a sacredness into that. And so these two figures, it's a male and a female, and they are marking this particular place with the moon, with these constellations. And I was describing this to Jim. He's like, oh, you got to tell the Tosans about that. So hopefully I get the grant and I can do more research and maybe tell more about it. But today that's all I've got for you. So.
You notice how he blends each particular moon with the one previous to it, or the one next to it. So that particular technique, he was really the first one to do something similar to this, and it's probably been copied by many major artists as well as amateur artists at least 15 or 20 times, at least. It was that popular. A lot of these things, a lot of my things, I always, if I was asked to lend paintings to a publication, I didn't hesitate, I did it. I had stuff flown out all over the country. I sent paintings over to Germany with a big show in Germany. I was there for 6 years. And they did a book on it called Indiana Kunst by Gerhard Hoffmann. And it was all in German, and they haven't translated it in English, which I hope they do someday. But anyway, my feeling was during my collecting that I would love to share it with other people rather than hide it in a vault and not let anybody know that I've got it, and it's my secret, my great thing, and I can live with it, nobody else can. I never took that attitude. I always felt that it should be seen, and I lent it out to many, many shows throughout the country and out of the country. And I was very pleased with it. And of course I had people tell me, how could you do that? They're going to come and steal it now from your apartment. And the answer was simple. Very simple. I don't know if you thought of it though. The answer that I gave them was, why would they come and break into my house to steal an Indian piece, an Indian art piece, when there's no technical market for it throughout the world? And what they would do is take a piece, not know its value, whether it could be worth $3,000 or $30, and take it out and try and sell it and get maybe $20 for it. It's just not worth their time and energy to take the time to come in and break into the house to get this stuff, because the prison time that they could get for doing something for nothing. And so you'll find that almost all major robberies by people that know what they're doing, except maybe druggies, they're not going to break into a place and steal something that they can't get money for, substantial money, because they're taking substantial choices on it and so forth. So that understands that. Now this, we're going through here real quick, and I'll point out to you this particular painting here by Bialac, and he lived up in Prescott for a number of years. He was a Navajo, and then he moved to Albuquerque, where he became a chaplain for the police department. And believe it or not, of all the paintings that I've got in my collection over the years, the one that so many people have come to the house and admired it, this is the one that they wanted to buy more than anything else from me. Of course, I wouldn't sell anything in the collection. But I had so many people say, well, remember me in your will on this one. If you won't sell it to me. It really was extremely popular, and it beautifully well done. This is a painting by Gilbert Atencio. You'll see quite a few of his. He was the nephew of the Maria the Potter from San Ildefonso, the world famous potter. And one of my favorite stories on that is one day I was driving in San Ildefonso and decided to stop and say hello to Maria, who I'd done a little legal work for on a problem that had popped up in Arizona. And knocked on the door, and one of her sisters came and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'd love to say hello to Maria. I'm in town." And she said, "Wait a minute," closed the door, came back in a few minutes and said, "Come with me." I walked in the house, and there was another room with the door closed, and she knocked on the door. Somebody said, "Come in," and there was Maria sitting in a chair. She was in her 90s at the time. Looking out, she looks up, she sees me, she says, "Oh, that's Gilbert's friend, the lawyer from Phoenix." And also, I had a show in Phoenix at the Heard Museum at one time, and we had a catalog in it. And the title that we put in it is, from memory?
Drawn from memory.
Drawn from memory. Because 99%, I would say, maybe I'm a little exaggerating there, maybe not that much, of the Indian artists paint from what they have seen and been in and done. They don't have models. The exception to that was R.C. Gorman. He did use models 90% of the time. But other of the Indians, because you'll see scenes around here like inside a kiva and so forth, and there's no way in the world they're going to let them sit there and draw those things at the time. And they're so etched in their memories that they can bring them out on their painting. Okay, then we go to this. This is a Walter Mutzka painting. Walter Mutzka was a Hopi that lived in Santa Fe and did work for one of the jewelers there. And he also did jewelry there and up in Colorado at one time. And I have quite a few of his pieces. This is another piece from San Ildefonso by Julian Martinez. Julian was the husband of Maria, and he decorated a lot of her pots. She's the one who was world famous for her black-on-black pots. And some of them today are selling for $200,000 to $300,000 a piece. And people clamor to get them, the people that collect that stuff. This one here was done by Hieronymia Montoya. She was a teacher at the school for a number of years after Dorothy Dunn. And she has two sons that are painters also. One is an architect, Robert, and Paul, who's a police officer who does little miniature paintings. And a lot of them, he was up on the Hopi Reservation for a number of years. And a lot of them the Hopi dances and stuff, and just tiny stuff. I don't know if we've got any of his things hanging up, but Robert's, I know we do. This is another San Ildefonso painting, early painting by Abel Sanchez, and you can see the type of figure that he uses in his, and he was famous for his sort of thing. This one's a little painting by Jose Ray Toledo, who was from Jemez. And then if you remember, I told you about cons between the dances. This is it right here. I say, it's got to be one of my favorite paintings. And then over here, I probably have 40 or 50 paintings by this particular artist from Zuni, Percy Sandy, who signed everything Kai saw. And the reason I did that is because the Zunis are one of the tribes that prohibited their people from painting during many years. But for some reason, they let him alone, and he did a lot of things about what was done on the ceremonies, in the homes, in everyday life. And I felt that by building up a particular compilation of his things, whatever museum or whoever got my paintings could either do a book on it eventually or do something with the Pueblo of Zuni, showing the way that the Pueblo developed over the later years and so forth. This gorgeous thing was done by Gerald Naylor, who is a Navajo artist. And Gerald Naylor did many, many similar to this. Actually, at one time he was roommates with Alan Hauser in Santa Fe. And I never knew him, of course, because he passed away before I started collecting. But I have quite a few of his paintings too, and they're just gorgeous. And then when you get an opportunity, when you come back, when you're not so crowded here, take a look at this painting by Mapiwi, Belino C.G. Herrera. Belino was a Zia Pueblo, which is out of Albuquerque. And if you take a close look, you can see every hair on his horse and on the calf here. And I just can't explain it. It's so magnificent. The technique and the amount of work that's in that and what he has accomplished with it, it almost makes it third-dimensional because of that matter. That it's really one of the outstanding paintings, I believe, in the collection. This one's kind of fun. This was done by Pablita Velarde, and she told me after I got it, I did that, Jim, when I was having my divorce, and that was the way I said it. And this little sculpture here is by Michael Naranjo. Michael was in the war in Vietnam and blinded, and when he came out, he became a sculptor, and he still is doing work. And this is one of his earlier pieces. And he did beautiful work for somebody that was blind, and really did nice things. So Blue Eagle, AC Blue Eagle, came from was a teacher at Bacone, the Indian school of Bacone in art. And this is one of his, he was very famous. You'll see another painting of him doing a painting by America Meredith as we go through this collection. And he was famous for his little deer and things like that, which would be in the other page. But you can see the serenity and the beauty again here. And all of these things, how symmetrical they are to just enhance and bring it in, bring her in. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but every one of my paintings are archivally taken care of. They all have been deacidified if necessary. They all have acid-free mats on them. And the frames are fantastic. The framer I've got is unbelievable. What he does with the frame is what the artist does with the painting. And instead of directing away from the artist, it brings you into the painting. And I think you'll notice that particularly on some of the fantastic paintings around here, that without that particular type of frame on it, it just wouldn't be the same painting. Some of the museums, which I definitely have argued with over the years, insist that everything be in a maple frame, just a thin little maple frame, and unfortunately, that does nothing for the painting. It kind of cuts them out. At one of the museums, they had a show where they had a bunch of Native American art, and I was with Alan Hauser at the time, and one of the paintings that I'd given him was in that frame, and I don't use the language he used, but he was very, very, very upset with them doing that, because they said, now my wonderful painting looks like everything else in here.
I know Al Mamade used to make his own frames. Do many of the Indians make their frames?
No, the one who made the frame, Al Mamade didn't make too many frames.
Oh, really?
I believe Bialac the one that made them.
I had two that he made that
Yeah,
I probably should
I
have
don't
held
doubt
on
that.
to.
He didn't make that much. He was living up in Hemes,
Right,
and he was teaching school there as well. And his son is a world famous author too.
yeah, I knew he.
Yeah, but he was more concentrated on teaching his kids and stuff. I bought one painting from him about this tall that's in the collection someplace. It was still wet when I took it, and when I took it with me, it was in the winter time. I took it to Albuquerque to a lady who had a place called the College Inn Bookstore, who did a bunch of framing. Her name was Mrs. Fisher, and she put a great, beautiful big frame on it. She was famous for the big frames that she used. She was in a wheelchair, but she was right there with those girls when they were putting those frames together to make sure everything was done properly. And she chose them and did a wonderful job. This is an Oklahoma artist here, Carlos Swayze. The Gilchrist has probably a couple hundred of her paintings at least, of his paintings at least, some of which are pretty poorly done, but they still have them. But this is one of his nursery things showing one of the dances. This is a magnificent piece by Dick West, who was the father of Rick West, who was a former director at the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C., and now heads the Museum of the Gene Autry in Los Angeles. And this is the third day, I believe, isn't it, of the Sundance, something like that. He only did 2 or 3 of these. This was the last one. He told me when he finished one evening. I commissioned this one from him when he was teaching at that time and not doing much painting. And he said this was the hardest one that he had ever done, and he was never going to do it again, and he didn't. But I've also been told it's the best one he ever did. And this was a great friend of mine that did this, probably one of the most important artists in Native American history, Fritz Scholler. He's the one that changed everything from being pretty and beautiful and something like that to show the Indian as the Indian really was. And he upset tons of people and others, but he was world famous when he was alive. He could paint a painting like this, and I'm not exaggerating, in an hour. He was honored by the American Academy, which is one of the biggest honors anybody in the world could get. They bring in artists, they bring in presidents, they bring in heads of government, all kinds of people and stuff. Fritz was there almost every meeting for about 10 or 15 years, because during their lunch break, he would get up with a canvas this big and paint a painting. And then when he finished with it, they would sell it and use the proceeds to benefit the children that they were eventually immediately sent up for. And I don't know of anyone that he ever did that he got less than $50,000 for. Just like that, in the beginning.
Did he use rollers or anything to paint like the background so quickly?
No, he just used his brushes. He got a lot of influence from different artists too. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the British artist,
Francis Bacon.
yeah, Francis Bacon, but this is a Baconish dog. That's the way that Bacon would do, very smoothly and things like that. And he is also one of the first, if not the first, of the Native American artists that used these little splashes in his art. And he had a purpose for it, because these splashes direct you to different parts of the painting that you can see and enjoy. Okay, we got to move. The young lady is going to kill me. One of Fritz's students, excuse me, was T.C. Cannon, who did these 2 pieces. This is Drinking Beer in Vietnam in 1967. This is a print, a lithograph. And behind you here is one of my closest friends during his lifetime, Michael Cabote's father. Michael did this piece here. This is Fred Cabote, who was a world famous Hopi artist. This I got it, believe it or not, out of Argentina. I think right now. And I was able to get this painting from him. And it was done in 1918 when Fred was over for dinner one night. I showed it to him and he said, "Oh, I remember that." He said, "I did so many of these." He said, but this particular one I did in 1918. And I believe in one of the catalogs you've mentioned a little of the history of it, or is it on here?
It's there.
It's in the catalog?
Yeah.
Thank you, Wally. Yes, it's in the catalog.
So that explains a little bit about that painting. And this is done by Michael Cavoni, his son. And also the one next to it is done by Michael. It's got to be one of my favorite paintings too. It's awful hard to say which is your favorite, because you just can't do it. But here he's got the Bialac people, which are not really people, they're kachinas. But if you notice, none of these have masks on them. They're not kachinas. They've got human faces. And you can see the positions of them, like this one here, and the young girl offering cornmeal to the male Bialac, and then the female. It's just an amazing painting. I've never seen anybody do anything quite like that.
Mr. Bialac, would you like some help?
I'm sorry,
Do you need some water?
but that's fine, thanks. Okay, then we'll go quick. This is an early painting of Tonita Peñas. This is another painting of Tonita Peñas here. This is another painting of hers, and the reason you see so many is because we have about 50 or so of them. And this is done by her son, Joe Herrera, and we've probably got about 20 or 25 of his paintings.
At least. And I'm going to give him a chance to take a drink and let you all know now. You guys know as docents that we don't normally allow food in the galleries, but you'll understand why we're making an exception. And also, you'll notice that Mr. Bialac, this is his work, and so he feels very attached to it. He's the only person right now that has permission to touch any of the paintings. So if I see any of you guys thinking, well, Jim touched that, I'm going to come and get your fingers, I promise. But I just wanted to just mention that. It's Jim's work. What are we going to say to him? If it was yours, when you donate your collections, we'll feel the same way towards you.
And I hope you will. Okay, then let's go on a little further. This painting here was done by Diana Leary. And it happened to be at a time when she was very upset with AIM, the American Indian Movement. She was very upset with it. And this is how she took out her frustration. You can see the arrows going into his head.
What year was that?
I don't know if I spoke to her about a month ago, but she's in Oregon now. But that has to be about 20 years ago at least.
At least maybe even 40, yeah. She's been painting, she's Comanche from Oklahoma, but she hasn't lived here in a very long time, so.
And incidentally, I mentioned about the painting techniques. She is right at the top, probably in the top 5 of all the Indian artists that had a control over the watercolors, and just nobody else did, like Woody Crumble back here. If you look close at it, you'll see what I'm talking about. You can see how she shaded it and how the use of it and the dripping and so forth to show blood and so forth coming down. You can see all of these things in her painting, and the hair and what's going on, and it's just something else. This is another Oklahoma young lady that did this piece here. This was done by Joan Hill, and she was very famous for doing a lot of paintings with these particular colors and stuff in them. So we've got a couple of large ones that are.
We do. Several are on loan to Arizona, the Arizona facilities.
Yeah.
Yes, the larger ones are in Arizona.
Yeah, and also, when she was younger, she did nude paintings of herself. She was a very beautiful woman, and they were very artistic. They were as good as anything you'd see that was produced in France and so forth. Just lovely things. And then back here, this was in the National Geographic March 1955 edition by Howard Twooksy was his name, I hope he. And rather than explain all of these things to you, they've done a wonderful job in here. This is basically a parrot, the abstract of a parrot. Then it goes on. And this is a Danny Minga early painting that he probably did in the 60s. And this is what they call a collage. I don't know if all of you understand what a collage is. But very simply, instead of just being a painting on a piece of paper or on carbon, whatever, this has got additions to it. You can see this is all things that were put on after the actual painting was done, and then he painted over it as well. And he's a member of the family, the famous Nampeo family from First Mesa in Arizona at the Hopi Reservation. And we've got 2 or 3 of his big ones, early ones, as well as some of the more modern ones too, which are wonderful. This painting, this artist here probably has, well, I know he has. There's a book out that was called Biographies of Indian Artists by Jean Snodgrass, who later became Jean Snodgrass King. And she was at Philbrook as the curator at Philbrook, and then she left there and went to where Christine is.
That is the Philbrook. That is the Philbrook. Was she at the...
She was a registrar at the Gilcrease also.
That's right. She started at the Gilcrease and then went to the Philbrook. Yes.
One of the ways.
Yeah.
Either ways. But anyway, in her book, she lists them, and she has more references to this particular artist than anybody else in the whole book, which is really something. And this was a lovely person. His name is George Morrison. And, well, you can just see from his title here. Soft light, warm violet day, red rock variation, Lake Superior landscape. And these particular ones had a line across here. You can see the particular group that he did with this. And that's the different variations utilize that.
They all have a red horizon line.
And then real quickly, these are paintings by Alaskan artists here. These came from the collection of Dorothy Jean Ray, who was the world authority on Native American paintings from Alaska and so forth. I was fortunate enough to know her, and when she decided to sell some of her paintings, she let me have them all. So we've got quite a few of them in the collection here. This painting here is one about how the mosquitoes were formed by John Hoover. John Hoover is the gentleman. Come on in, everybody, please. John Hoover was an Alaskan who died recently in his 90s also, and did wonderful carvings like this. This is what they call a triptych. It's a 3D piece thing. As you can see, I forgot the title of this too. Shaman Catching the Soul. And it's a beautiful thing. And then when you get tired of looking at that, it closes and you have that. I assume that you will have it that way at times too.
Thank you. Yes.
And this was done by another Alaskan. He teaches up in University of Alaska.
At Fairbanks, yes.
Yeah. And this is this Arctic sea otter. And if you get a little closer to the side, you can see that he put the nose on top of the canvas. Okay, then we'll skip through here fast, except that this sculpture here is an Alan Hauser sculpture. Alan was a dear friend of mine, and he was a sculptor as well as a painter. He was also a teacher, and he's on your license plates. His sculpture is on your license plates, one similar to this. And in 2014, the whole state of Oklahoma is going to have shows of his work all over the state. All over the state, every part of the state. And they'll be borrowing pieces of his too, I know from here as well as from institutions outside of Oklahoma. He was very famous and did extremely well in Arizona as well. Real quick, over here, this one you want to spend a little time with because it really is a fantastic thing to see. This is an early Jerome Tiger. Jerome Tiger is more famous for his very liquid, eternal, how else would you describe it? Could we listen?
I'm sorry, what?
How else would you describe Jerome Tiger, his later things?
His work is much more in the studio style with the vacant background and focused on the southeastern tribal culture specifically, and that's in contrast to the prairie or the plains tribes that represented in that image.
This is a burial service, the way that the Choctaw custom. This is a painting, you'll see another painting by this gentleman going through the rain, carrying a deer. And if you look closely at this, you'll see the deer that he's stalking right over here.
Oh,
But you can miss it just as easy as you can find it if you're not looking for it. Next to this is, again, one of the most wonderful artists that developed, Oscar Howe, who is also a teacher up in South Dakota. And it's just hard to describe him. It's more fun to have a curator describe Oscar Howe, because Oscar is in a completely class by itself. Nobody else could touch him, and it still hasn't been able to. So,
Want to talk about Oscar? I can talk about Oscar. I love Oscar. Oscar Howe, he's Yanktonai Nakota, which is one of the tribes that's from the southern part of South Dakota over towards Minnesota. Their tribe is culturally related to the Dakota and the Lakota, and really their dialects are only difference in those where those letters interchange, and that's why if you hear it Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, they're all very close to each other in the similar way that we have here in Oklahoma, like the Muskogee and the Seminole and the Choctaw and the Chickasaw. Their languages are all of a similar dialect. It's the same situation up there. And one of the things that I love, and again, this is like, there's so much to be written about Native art, is that with Oscar Howe, he was a student, I believe with Alan Hauser at Dorothy Dunn's studio, but even, we've got one image upstairs that you can even go look at now, and he was pretty young when if it's President Obama, tell him he's got my vote. So, that upstairs you can see that he's already looking at how to rotate the figures in the plane. It's a series of horses. It's like a group of horses, and already he's rotating that. You can see by this time he has already really elaborated that idea. Now the thing about Oscar Howe is that people look at him and they go, oh, it's inspired by Cubism. Well, you can see that, can't you? But except that it's not. He's actually inspired by his own cultural ideas, which say that there is a central axis around which everything rotates. The stars, the sky, and the earth below. And that they're an inflected version of each other. There's a very direct relationship between certain constellations, certain geographic sites, and that the connections between them are, like I said, are inverted, and so you have this sort of axis that the central axis, and then this constellation connects with this. Well, if you start to pull those down, you start to see a teepee forming, and yes, that's why they use teepees. It's a reiteration of their whole cosmology, even that architectural form. You can see that happening here. You can see that this sort of the belly button of the form is that central axis, and everything is rotating around it. And as a student, we have the student work upstairs from Oscar Howe. He's already working that idea out. Now the story goes is that he did serve in World War II and was in Europe and saw Cubism and came back and incorporated that. Some of you may know he did his MFA here at OU, Boomer Sooner. So, I mean, like, our influence just extends and extends. But even in his MFA work, he's playing with this idea, and the images, I can't wait to write this in some kind of form or fashion, but I think that it's something that people don't always know about Oscar Howe. So, anyway, okay, it's your tour.
This sculpture here of the young cowgirl with just boots on was done by Bob Jesus, the son of Alan Hauser. And then over here is a painting by Alan Hauser, one of the many paintings of his. And then there's a small little painting by that lady here, and another kind of drawn type of thing drawn by one of the brothers, the Romeros. This is Diego's. And then right next to here is a stickball game that was done by another Oklahoma artist, one who I love dearly and I think is one of the major artists to be coming out in Oklahoma at this time. We have probably about 6 or 7. And then I mentioned to you before about A.C. Blue Eagle and being painted by American Meredith. This is the painting here that she did of A.C. Blue Eagle doing his fabled deers. He did books on them and pamphlets and everything else. It's quite famous. And this is a lovely painting by her. She's a very talented young lady. You'll see quite a few of her things.
So she's going to be one of the speakers, and then she's also on Sunday during the Community Day, one of the people doing a demonstration. I believe she's doing watercolor demonstration. So if you wanted to, she's very talkative like me. And if you wanted to come listen to her, she's worth the time.
Oh, that, no.
Another thing that she does is, in most of her paintings, not in this one, she puts in figures of Cherokee language.
Yes.
Incorporates it. It's not in this particular painting, but she does do that on those. And then here are a couple of the more contemporary paintings here. She works with them every day. I don't. I love them, and I wouldn't have purchased them unless I had. And I really think the world of them to explain to you so you can understand what the artist was trying to do. I think she can do that a lot better than I can. The one thing I want to tell you is that this particular piece is all solid wood. It's got to weigh 300 or 400 pounds. We've got one other one too. And this comes from Canada, but now I'll let her tell you about these three here.
Well, okay, so that is George Longfish, and he tends to be an experimental artist, and so you can see that if you go look at the surface there. That's a range of materials that have been applied to the surface of that paper. And this is Peter Jemison. He's Seneca, and he really addresses issues of culture and identity in a very contemporary vernacular. And so what we're looking at, I mean, and you can kind of see it, the brown paper is actually from a paper bag. And he did this, it's a sort of a commentary on consumerism. He used all these paper bags and deconstructed them back into the, you know, they all fold flat if you unglue them. And he just added on these materials. These are, the white is collaged on, and then he's applied this. But this is some kind of a story, and you know, I don't know every tribe's every story, so this is some kind of story from the Seneca tribe about the birds and the strawberries. And the strawberries were cut and pasted, so this is all collaged on and just layers. And his whole, it's part of a larger series that are the paper bag series. But he also has done work where the paper bags stay standing, and he does
Sculpture.
Yes, and he kind of uses them sculpturally, even though they are still just paper bags. You know, I mean, so you pick it up or you flatten it or fold it. It would be just, you can unfold it back out and stuff. And he uses those to talk. He does a lot of portraiture on the surface of those to kind of examine, like, what do we fill ourselves with? How do we build ourselves internally using these paper bags, and how does consumerism affect that from a native perspective? You can understand these are some real challenges from culturally to developing your, maintaining your traditional identity in a capitalistic world. And then this is Marianne Nicholson. This is from a series that, Jim, you saw this installed, right, up at the Idle-Jorg. Marianne Nicholson won an Idle-Jorg Fellowship 1999, and part of the fellowship, they get a very large sum of money, and then the result of that is that they're to do a series that will be shown at the Idle-Jorg Museum. And so this was part of that series, and these are coppers, which for the Northwest tribes, like tribal leaders, are gifted a copper as sort of an acknowledgement of their role to the community. And when they're ceasing that leadership role, which usually it's not the kind of thing like somebody is unseated or anything like that. You know, it's sort of usually a passing on. You guys know, it's a lot of work to be in charge, right? Yes. And so what they'll do actually is take these coppers and break them off and recognize people who have been supportive of them or people in the community with portions of those coppers. Portions of the coppers are almost considered more valuable than the whole because it's the result of your commitment not only to that leader but also to the community. Yes,
Spell the word copper.
Just C-O-P-P-E-R.
Oh, copper. Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yes. Copper.
Now, incidentally, this is called the Tree of Life.
Yes.
And this is the Tree of Life here. And see, the way she has painted that when the light is on it now, it is so much more outstanding than any other piece on her canvas. Well, there is no canvas, but on this piece whatsoever. And it really highlights everything. And that is not easily done, believe me. That takes a lot of concentration and work.
And she has, the nice thing for us is that Jim did collect from her while she was working in two-dimensional work because she's moved on to light installation. This is going to be something from a museum standpoint. They're incredibly beautiful, and they're just, I mean, they're really breathtaking, and it's worth, if you have an internet access, to look up her name. Her work is really amazing, but it will become less something that can be added to a collection and displayed like this. So for us to have an example of her work from this period, when her work is more tangible, is really wonderful.
Do we know what the writing says?
No. But it's in the traditional language, and I guess I could research that. Email me in a week, and I will see if I can find out what that says.
Or you can contact her and ask her.
Well, that's what I will do. Yeah.
Okay, then in the catalog that they did of this particular collection, this painting here by Janet Catoni is very prominent in there. The lady that Carol Harrelson that did the editing of the book found a way to use this particular painting in the book in a fantastic way, which shows it shows to me about the university here and the university press and the extremes they will go to make whatever they publish one of the finest publications of its kind. And that certainly shows not only that, but this painting here by Amy Whitehorse. There's another one by her too that's used as a frontispiece as well. Not this particular piece, but another one. And how she can blend those in with those things is just amazing. And you'll see that when you see the catalog. And this painting right here is actually a lithograph, and this again was done by George Morrison. George Morrison also did paintings with what looked just like scribblings on them. I'm sure that we've got one of them in the collection, and then he did another one he calls red cubes.
It's on display in your gallery upstairs, yes.
Okay, and when those two pieces were sent to Germany with the show that traveled for 6 years, it had not just my stuff in that show, but stuff from all over the country. And those two pieces, they told me, were the most popular in Germany. Now why, I can't understand or explain to you. But you can see that what's art to one person is not art to another, and what one person enjoys doesn't mean that you have to enjoy it either. That at least they know that it was done with a purpose, and it wasn't just random scribblings, but thought out each particular marker where he put it. And this I've always loved, because if you get closer, you can see how the colors blend in here and go through. And again, it's just not scribbling. He knew what he was doing. And you don't find him this size, that type of thing. I think this is really unique.
Yes.
And the colors and everything make it beautiful. Now we're back where we started from.
Did you talk about Tony's piece?
Yes.
I think the piece talks for itself.
Oh. Did you mention that he'll be here for the symposium and for the demonstration on Sunday? Okay.
And if you want a little more explanation on this particular piece, he has written an explanation here. And would you like to read it to them?
Do I want to read it to him?
Would you like to?
Bialac acquired his first work by Tony Abeta in 1997 through a trade with the artist. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
Bialac, as a friend of the Abeta family, has known the artist since his childhood. I was told this tall. Seed Simply Emerging was included in the 2008-2009 exhibit Underworldness held at the Heard Museum, where Bialac purchased the work from the artist following the closing of the exhibit. Abeta produced his painting while developing a body of work using charcoal and ink wash on paper. This is actually attached to a canvas that gets that sort of the framed in presentation. Same with Emmy Whitehorse's two paintings, are also works on paper. That explores themes of creation through primal, botanical, and animal forms. That's actually a quote from Tony, so I didn't write that. The monochromatic drawing is a complement to Abeta's other paintings that belong to the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art, which use brilliant colors to depict Navajo culture. We also have a painting of his that's going to be at the Sam Noble second exhibit, which will open October 6th. And then we have one of his paintings is included in the Adkins collection, that is more like the work that he became famous for, and he continues to do that work. So I don't mean to make it sound like he's completely evolved from that, but sort of expanded his sort of visual vocabulary to include these washing materials. And do you want to talk about the thing here, or do you think we should?
It's in the statement that he made that went with the painting. I was a little surprised it wasn't put up with it.
We didn't get that statement.
I sent it.
I'll look for it.
Okay. But he explains this too.
Yeah.
Each of these things are put in by hand. They just weren't.
That's micaceous clay. That's a slab of micaceous clay, and those are beads, right? That
Yeah.
you put in. Yeah.
To make little designs through there. That takes time and a lot of patience, believe me. And that's one of the wonderful things about the Native American artists. They have the time, or they take the time, and they're very patient and do the best they can. And she can speak to that a lot because her husband is a printmaker and teaches it to the children.
Well, he teaches next door, too. So. Can you agree with me that Mr. Bialac's amazing? I've enjoyed this week spending time with him. We got to meet each other at his home in Phoenix or Scottsdale in May, and I think we kind of hit it off right off the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we've been having a good time this week, but
She hit me first.
so anyway, I think we've probably got a few minutes. Are we okay on time? Like maybe what time is it?
It's 11:12.
12. We could probably do 5 minutes. Are you up to?
Begay is not familiar. There's so many Begays. Harrison Begay, the most famous of the Begays,
Right.
passed away about a month ago.
That's right.
Was he the medicine man, one of the 5 that knew all the medicine ways?
A lot of people on Navajo claim they're medicine men and they aren't.
Okay, well,
And a lot
Wilson's
of them
father
are trained in it and don't tell anybody about it. So
Wilson's father supposedly was one of those 5.
very well could be.
I've had several questions about the last name Begay, and I happen to have a little bit of insight that I'm just going to share with you all, just to maybe help cut, because I think you're the second person that's asked me about the Begay name. When Navajo people were being enrolled, as all of us Native people have, and our ancestors were enrolled into, whatever, a permanent fixed identity for the United States, a Navajo family would come in and they would say, a father would say, this is my son, my firstborn son, or my son Joe, that's the firstborn. Firstborn is Bialac, if you've heard the name Bialac. My secondborn son, Jeffrey, is, I'm making this all up, of course, but Jeffrey is the secondborn, and the phrase for secondborn is actually Begay. And this is my thirdborn son, Joseph, and I don't know if I used that one already, but Joseph is the thirdborn son, and so thirdborn is Sosi. So if you have ever heard Begay, Bialac, or Sosi, that's the birth order that was assigned as a last name at the time that they were enrolled. It means nothing about family affiliations. So it's like Smith or Jones, or it just doesn't imply anything, and so maybe that's helpful for you guys if people ask you, well, are these artists related because their last name is the same? It probably doesn't mean that.
Wow, okay.
Now, let me keep on this for just a second. One of the, I consider, and I think she does also, the better of the Begays that is not as well known as the other Begays is a young man by the name of Arthur C. Begay. And we have several of his paintings here. And his paintings are much underpriced. He should have priced them much higher. They're still available in places around Bialac and up in Shiprock and things. And if you ever get the opportunity, take a look at his stuff because they're really very, very good. They're wonderful things.
We have 2 on exhibit upstairs, and we have several on exhibit at the School of Law.
Yeah, so be sure and take a look at that because, as I say, he's the most overlooked Begay of all the Begays.
This is sort of a cheap question, but I've been familiar with the Koshari versus Kachino for a long time. You're the first person I've ever heard talk about Koshari in forever. So, I mean, is that still a recognized dichotomy out there? They still have it? the koshari, as I understood, being the quote, real sacred gods, and as opposed to the Katsuni dancing all over the place and all the parties and so forth. You mentioned it early on, the koshari.
Yeah, no, they're very,
I
very
heard everybody
important
talking.
personages.
I hear, distinguished from the kachinas. Or
Yeah,
katsuni.
they're not kachinas, right, correct.
And I never hear anybody talk about them anymore.
Yeah, there are a lot of dolls that are done, they call kachinas, but they really are not kachinas. They have to be a masked individual to be a kachina. They're even giving them different names now. They're calling them Katsina, which I think is ridiculous because for the last 150 years they've been called kachinas. Now all of a sudden somebody's decided to be politically correct and call them a Katsina instead of Kachina. And one of the agreements I got with this museum is that they would not use the word Katsina, they'd call them kachinas.
In reference to the dolls, but I will add that we have the big Kachina show coming up that's going to open on Saturday, also at the Sam Noble, and then next year, actually next summer, we'll be doing a show here of Kachinas. We've decided, we've had a couple of conversations with people around the country, including, what's your friend's name at the herd, Bruce?
Bruce McGee.
Bruce McGee. We've visited with a couple of Hopi people because we'd like to be able to have in our labeling some distinction between when we're referencing the doll versus the deity. And so in our labeling, if you see the term Katsina with the TS used, we're referring very specifically to the deity. And if we are using the word CH, Kachina, we're referring very specifically to the doll. Now, in the Hopi belief, the doll carries the spirit of the Katsina in it. But we would like to be able to make that distinction, at least internally, and for people who are coming to see the exhibits, that there is a difference between the spirit and the role that the spirit has within the tribal cosmology and their social ordering and their systems, but also between the figures that we have on exhibit. Does that make sense? So we're not putting any of the spirits on display, we're putting the dolls on display, and so we are going to call them kachinas and make that reference. And so you will see that even in here, in some of the labeling and upstairs as well, that when we have, if the image happens to do in discussing some things very specific to the culture, you'll see that distinction in the language that Mark and I are using. And we're adding that to our style book that we have just to kind of make sure we're all using the same language in the same manner. Is that helpful too, to know that too for you guys? Okay.
Well, the kachinas were first started when they were making little flat dolls for the babies. They had a first year, and a second year, and a third year. And for a number of years, the only reason the kachinas were made was to give to the young girls at the dances and between the dances this presents and so forth, so that they could memorize and know what the kachina wore, what the kachina was, and learn from their dolls exactly. And they started, people coming through on the train and everything else, saw some of these things and wanted to buy them, and that's when the commercialism started, and they started doing a lot of these dolls for commercial purposes, but they still did a lot of them for the family and for the kivas and for the ceremonies and some things like that. And then they developed now where you've got kachina dolls out there that are selling for $25,000 or more, a lot more, and they're just fabulous, fantastic things that they're doing.
And you have over 1,100 kachinas in your collection. Is that correct?
Close to
And
it.
did you tell me you're still buying? You saw,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So that number is evolving. Do we have any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you Native American? Or how did you get the passion for the art?
Well, that's a long story too. Of course, I'm Jewish, so I'm a member of the Lost Tribe, so. But, no, I got it because I went to a show at the Herd Museum one time and fell in love with the paintings there. Called up the doctor who owned them and told him who I was and said I would love to buy you lunch or dinner so I could find out a little more about this type of painting. He said, no, I'm too busy, and hung up. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because that piqued my interest in what was going on, and I started reading about them, I started looking for them, I started talking about them, I started collecting them and everything else, and that's how it developed. Then later on, since we got a minute or two, we became good friends, and he was going up to the Nelson Rogers Museum to take a collection, and he asked me to identify one particular piece, which was it now? Well, it was a print that I had told him before. So he asked about an auction, and he said the only thing they had was a couple of prints, which I wasn't interested in. He paid $500 for it. And when he came back, he said, I bought it. I said, well, that's your problem, not mine. And then later on, when he was taking these things up, he wanted me to appraise it. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, I know it's a print, because if you go to Oklahoma, you're going to be near Norman. And he said, yeah, we're going to stop in Norman. I said, well, take a look at their library at the Swadeski books, which they produced on Native American Indian art. And take a look at the one on the Pueblos, and I think the first or second one you'll see is a piece that you paid $500 for, which is just a print that was done for the Swadeski.
So you just,
Yeah, that's what he did.
so you taught yourself? Just from your own research?
But I'm sure he probably turned around and tried to sell it to somebody else.
No, I mean your art, so you just did your
I'm sorry?
You did your own research on the art and the
Oh,
artists and the
absolutely.
culture?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. The library I gave him just on the Indian art fills, what, 2 rooms?
A big one.
A big one.
And I also would add, I mean, he's clearly charming. And he also, part of your education was just getting to know the artists.
Oh, yeah.
And what they would talk about, what they looked for, and who they were interested in too, right?
Right.
And so,
And as an attorney, I represented many of them, some of the best, like Fred Shoulder, Charles Loma. Alan Hauser I couldn't represent because he was in New Mexico and I couldn't practice there, but I would always get letters or things from him asking me whether he should sign a particular thing, and I could tell him that. And he was one of my best friends too, as well as Charles and Fritz. Oh, this is one of the rings that Charles did. Which belongs to the museum.
it doesn't fit my finger.